Hello there. Today is August 7th, 2014, and I just thought I would speak a little bit about my grandmother. Who passed away almost a month ago, July 11th. I had no intention of talking about my grandmother like this, but what happened is it's been raining all day. It's beautiful. It's been this steady, wonderful downpour, and there's a little squirrel huddled in the branches of the oak tree right outside my window, and it's just been lovely. I love rainy days like this, when as long as it's not severe and there are no tornadoes in the forecast. But it's been beautiful. So anyway, I was thinking about some poetry I'd written for her some time ago, and I thought I would read that poem, and I also thought I would read another prose poetry piece that I did for a grand uncle of mine who passed away 10 years ago. And that is called Heaven, and that is philosophical and poetic, and yet it's a prose piece. So, and I thought, well, that suits my grandmother too, so I thought I'd read both. And I'll start off with the short one, because I'm sure not everyone likes deeply philosophical, poetic prose pieces, so I think the short poem will be good first. Before I start, I'd just like to talk a little bit about my grandmother. Her name was Prabha Devi, and she died at 93 and a half. She was in actually very good health for her age, but she had a fall and broke her hip and passed away. And I was very, very close to her, not because, she encouraged me on writing or anything like that. In fact, she never understood what I was doing, and she asked me a couple of times, I wish you'd become a doctor, or she told me a couple of times, I wish you'd become a doctor. But she was extraordinarily loving and extraordinarily strong and very independent, even though she married at 15. She married at 15, and my grandfather was not the easiest of men to live with. And after he died of Alzheimer's in 1998, she moved in with us, and so I took care of her for the last 16 years. And she did have some dementia in the past 3 years. Not total dementia, but some, and that was very challenging at times, but I don't regret one single moment I spent with her. I think for a couple of reasons. One is because she came to this country when I was born, and I think unless you're about in your mid-30s and up, you can't even imagine how different America or St. Louis was in the early 1970s. I mean, there were hardly any Indians here, hardly any, very few Asians, and you were such an outsider, really. So, but as a child, it was wonderful to have your grandmother as a rock, right? I mean, your family, of course, and your grandmother as your rock when you're just so different from everyone around you. To give you an example of how different it was, my grandmother had to send us dal, lentils, from India because you couldn't buy it here. I remember a girl in my school, making fun of some lunch that my mom had made me, this potato curry, and she said, "Ooh, what are those black things?" And she meant the black mustard seeds, which so many Americans are so familiar with now. So it was such a different time, such a different experience of growing up than what Indian kids have today. Totally different. There was no community like that at all. I'm just looking at the squirrel outside the window. Actually, it's still huddled from the rain. It's adorable. So anyway. But to tell you just a little bit more about my grandmother, she was, her English was superb, absolutely superb. She spoke this correct British English, and she actually got into medical school, but my grandfather did not want her to work, and she had to listen to my grandfather. So I just wanted to read you one little passage from her diary, just to show you this how superb her English was. It starts out July 16th, 1969. Watched on TV the liftoff of Apollo 11, the moon landing mission. 20th night, 10:30 p.m. Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin landed on the moon for the first time a man from Earth to set foot on the moon. As soon as Neil Armstrong put his foot on the moon, he said, then she's crossed it out and said, no, he exclaimed, "That's one small step for man, but a giant step for mankind." Oh, it was a fascinating sight to watch, so clearly at a distance of 250,000 miles from Earth. It is unbelievable. So that's my grandmother. So anyway, I thought I would read this poem. This is the first poem that I wrote for her. It's called, I wrote this about 10 years ago. I was at Borders at the time. And it's called, see, my grandmother was really particular about time, and she remained so until, even in her last days, she was particular about time. She'd always look at the clock. So this poem is called The Weather. If the sun forgot what time to set, it could ask my grandma. "The sun will set at 7:48, she proclaims, turning to me, away from the television. The sun better not be late nor early. My grandma hates the waste of wait. She is punctual, as on time as newscasting for viewers, floundering for a lead, a hook, a bait, to attract viewers who need the news, or at least something new. At 5, 6, and 9, the news punctually punctuates my grandma's day. Without news, my grandma would waver, not knowing the weather. The high will be in the low 80s, she declares, and the low will be in the high 60s. She sighs every night, shakes her head. They say one thing, but the weather does another. I nod. Weather has a mind of its own. I like that. I am glad weathermen will never be weathered by certainty. I wonder, will age surprise me one day? Will I find I am in my early 80s? As a sudden storm wrinkles a clear day, will I know I am old? I will shake my head, snap out of myself, turn on the television, for I will need to know the weather tomorrow. So that's that. And just, as I was reading this, a couple of memories came into my mind. Again, the experiences with her were amazing. She, most recently, she would ask me, why do you have so many clothes in your closet? I really don't have that many clothes in my closet. But she would ask me why. And she said, and I understood, though, because she grew up at a time where you only had 3 saris, and you'd wash them, and they were good quality saris, and you'd wash them over and over again. You wouldn't have all this cheap factory-made stuff from around the world. And it would always bother her that my hair wasn't neatly combed in the proper South Indian way with the braid here. She'd often ask me, when are you going to comb your hair? Are you going to comb your hair when you come back from work? But it was great, though. It's great to be connected to a time that is not just this. So you don't get carried away with the frenzy of our age, I think. And in that respect, I treasure the memories of the summers I spent in her home in Bangalore, in Jayanagar, which was very quiet at that time, in the 1970s, 1980s. It was so quiet. And, we used to sleep with the mosquito netting over our beds. and there was a grandfather clock in the living room, and I'd hear that. And then in the morning, I'd hear my grandfather. He would be listening to the radio, because nowadays you have cable news in India, but there was no news. I mean, there was only one TV channel at that time, so the news was on it, once a day or whatever it was then. But he would be listening to Sanskrit shlokas, and he would be shaving from like a cup with a razor, And then I would hear my grandma in the kitchen. She'd be making these plastic cups of these steaming, milky, sweet South Indian coffee. And my brother and I would run into the kitchen and, we'd drink those cups of coffee. They were so good. And it's one of my great joys that, because she was so particular about her coffee, I mean, she loved it. She loved her coffee. And it was one of my great joys that I made her coffee for the last 3 years of her life, morning, noon, and night. Or not night, morning and afternoon. And it was my great joy that she loved it. And she used to say, hold the cup, and say in that typical Indian way, first class Nartan. Or anyone who knows Aingar Tamil out there, she would say, Rambananaikana. That means it was excellent. So I never thought I would be able to make coffee that she would like, because she was so particular. So that was a real thrill for me. So yeah. So I'm so grateful, not simply to have been close to my grandmother for so long, but that I knew someone from a truly different era. I mean, I knew her well. I mean, she was born in 1920. She grew up during the Raj in India, and she has memories of World War II, of Gandhi in India. I mean, it's incredible. She's written that in another journal I gave her. And another memory from my summers in India. This is one of those wonderful, wonderful things that makes India India. Is at that time, you wouldn't simply buy milk in a store. The milkman would come with his buffalo. So I remember in the mornings I would look out, and there he was, the milkman, and he would squeeze the udders of milk into the steel pails, and I can still hear it fizz into the pail. Then he would pour it. It was frothing. He would pour it into a pan that my grandma had. And that's how she would make the fresh coffee. So I remember that. And she used to tie, the scent. The one flower that brings India back to me immediately is the jasmine flower, the malige. So she used to tie that in my hair. And when you go to India and you go to the markets, and they measure strings of flowers, the champige, the malige, the jasmine, the mums, they measure it by the length from their elbow to the hand. And I used to love watching that, these plates of colored, mounds of scented, fresh flowers that you would ask for a certain length of them, because you would use them as garlands for your deity, or, in your entrance to the house, Indian dance movement. So yeah. So I'm so grateful to have had such wonderful experiences of an era that is gone, because India, of course, is now, I mean, many Indian things still remain in India, but, I spent the summers there without television, and no phones, and it was great. So, anyway, that's enough. I've been rattling on and on, but I just I thought I'd make a verbal tribute to my grandma, and I think the next piece I'll do in a separate video, because this is so long already. Okay, see you later.